true. People come and say, you know, I said, you know, I said, well, I just want to say you are in your audience.
Yeah.
I think
Henry clearly did what he had to develop a tobacco policy. They did later. I don't know if they had to work for it. But Texas. Yeah, they did what he read. Yeah.
I see people all the time say they want a job. I said, no, you're not here.
Oh, yeah.
I said, is even a postal I don't know if they still, I wouldn't buy stamps.
Yeah. Yeah.
They had signs in there when I don't know what they said. They were hiring.
He said that with confidence.
Yeah.
Becky? All right, I'm going to call this meeting of the Sweetwater City Council to order. Ask Richard Acuna with Avondale Baptist Church to give the invocation this morning, and then Councilman Castro will lead us in the pledges.
Thank you.
Will you pray with me? Father God, we just thank you and love you, Father, for who you are, what you have done, what you are going to do. Father, I lift up the city council to you and the city administration as they conduct city business. Father, I pray that you would be in the midst of all the decisions that needs to be made, that we put you in the forefront of everything that we do. Father, I pray that you would just continue to bless this community and the ones that you have placed to lead us in the direction that you want us to go. Father, we love you, and we ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Please join me in the pledge of allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please join me in the pledge of allegiance to honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to the Texas.
One state under God,
one and indivisible.
All right, we'll now move to item 4, which is discuss, consider, and act upon approval of minutes for meeting held on May the 10th.
Make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
he was the first. Oh, I didn't get that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Item number 5, calls for public input. Is there anyone this time who wishes to speak on any matter? Okay, we'll now hear a presentation from Ms. Caroline Harrelson, Retail Recruitment Specialist with Retail Coach.
Good morning.
Just going to introduce you. This is Caroline. She is one of our retail recruiters with the Retail Coach. And she's going to give you all an update presentation on kind of what they've been working on over the past 6 to 8 months.
Thank y'all so much for letting us come. Thank you so much for letting us work with the city of Sweetwater and your group. It's been such a pleasure for us to work with Sweetwater. We have seen such great responses. Since we started this contract with you all, and sometimes it's a little bit frustrating when we try to recruit retailers to communities that we don't get much retail response. Sweetwater, we have seen more response than we've seen in many of our communities and smaller communities that we're working with in Texas especially. So I'll go ahead and get started. If we go to the next slide, there we go. The retail trade area. This is how we talk the retail language to the retailers. I think that you guys have seen this before, Misha. You guys have seen the information that we put together, the demographics that we've pulled. So just real quickly, when we talk about Sweetwater, we don't look at your primary population in the city limits. We tell the retailers where everyone's coming from and shopping in the market regularly, and that's how we get the population number for the retail trade area that speaks to them. So we're not saying it's 5,000 or 6,000, we're saying it's 25,000 or whatever it may be based on how far your pool is. And we do this pool based on cell phone data. So we can see where your home address is or these people's home address and see that people as far as Hamlin are coming and just stopping and consuming goods in your market with regularity. If we go on to the next slide, this is a quick just rundown of the demographics that we put together based on that retail trade area that we drew from that cell phone data. You can see that right now your population we're selling it to retailers, which is true because that's what the consumer base is in Sweetwater, is 35,000, about 35,000. And it's also positive that there's growth over the next few years. And there's even more growth that's been shared with me about, future housing and that sort of thing coming on the market. So that's really exciting to see. Next slide, recruitment strategy. Next slide. We do all of our recruitment through emails, phone calls, texts, providing sites to the retailers, and then the conferences. Yesterday, I had the pleasure of driving around with Misha and Ethan again, and our team has done this a number of times just to look at where the traffic flow is in the market, what new sites have come online, what would be the best site for some of the retailers that we have interested, and then taking pictures of those and sending that information back to retailers. Yesterday, we talked about some retailers when we were in the car, and I was even able to text one of them and get a quick response about if they were interested in that sort of thing. So we have the contacts with the retailers. They trust us because we talk to them with regularity, and so it's not just a cold call about a city that somebody really wants to get them into. Because of what we do in the demographics that we know they're looking for, we really get good responses from them and know who to talk to and how they like the information delivered. Next. Retail recruitment process. We can go on to the next one, and I'll talk about that one quickly. Same thing, in-office visits, text, phone calls. This is what you guys really care about. We have talked to a number of retailers on behalf of Sweetwater. These are some of the responses that we've gotten, this page and the next page, but we can run through these. Brahms is very interested. They haven't found the right site. This was a couple months ago that they gave us this feedback, so it's time for us to check back in now that I've been in the market again, and I can shoot them some more sites so that we can get it back on their front burner. Burger King, actively working with someone to find a site. I'd really hoped that the Burger King rep was going to be able to meet me out here while I'm here today, but they weren't able to. They had a site that they would have bought that day, but then when we went back to it, that site was no longer available, so we're trying to work and get them in another direction on another site. Denny's has shown some initial interest in Sweetwater. We think that would be a great opportunity off the interstate or by the hotels or something. Just, sit down, breakfast type spot. Grease Monkey was another one that was very interested in Sweetwater. It'd be great to have another tire oil change type place. They only, and you guys can appreciate this with building cost and inflation right now, they only want to find a building that they can move right into, basically. We sent them a building, but it did not have the garage bays, and that's what they were really looking for. So put that on hold for a little while. If we can go to the next slide. Harbor Freight is another one. They would love to be in Sweetwater. They, again, need existing space. There's existing space to Sutherland's, for example, but they couldn't do that because of the exclusions of being right next to Sutherland's. Sutherland's wouldn't allow that, of course. So we're continuing to send them some new spaces. We talked about a few yesterday when we drove around that I'll be sending them this afternoon. We've got a current focus on grocery as well, just to have some more options for you guys in the market. HEB has been contacted by us. They're looking at DFW mainly, so we're trying to get them to branch out a little bit and look more at Sweetwater and down I-20. Panda Express is super interested. They have made an initial visit or two to the market. They've brought their corporate site selector. They brought their broker to look at sites, so we're awaiting feedback on them, but we hope that they'll be moving forward on something soon. And the United Supermarket, so United is another one that we've contacted when we've kind of amped up the focus on that. One more that is not on here that we talked about yesterday that we forgot to include is Dunkin Donuts also has an interest in the market. They're super interested. They are in the process of hopefully signing a new franchisee, which, as you can imagine, takes a lot of time. But once that franchisee is signed, then they hope to have Sweetwater on their on one of the ones that they're going to have to build out. And then we did hear recently that HTO is also looking in the market. So that's a quick rundown of the retailers that we've contacted. We have bi-weekly meetings with Misha and David and with Ethan, and we go through these results. We talk about, what you guys would like to see, what feedback that they're getting from all of you, and just anything new that's coming on the market and anything that we can do better and provide feedback on and who we've talked to. So that's kind of how we've been keeping everybody up to date and making it a real team effort. Next slide. We have attended a number of conferences on your behalf, and I know you guys are short on time, so I won't go into those too much, but we did a conference, and these are national conferences and trade shows where we talk with these retailers in person. We did one in March, another one in May, and we'll be doing a retail live event in September in Austin. Next slide. The Red River Conference, 3,000 attendees. Next slide. Las Vegas had 25,000 attendees. These are brokers. These are retailers. These are all the spectrum of the people that we need to get in front of. Next slide. Dfw Broker Focus. We've been putting a really big focus lately on talking to the brokers who are the decision makers for the retailers and trying to get the Dfw brokers to focus outside of the DFW area, because we know that Sweetwater is also they're also the deal makers for the Sweetwater area. So we're trying to put Sweetwater on their front burner instead of just keeping them focused on the big deals in the DFW area. We also had a representative from Henry S. Miller, which is a developer, basically, come out and meet with Misha recently and talk about Sweetwater. We have a lot of retailer interest, but there's not quite the strip mall that would work for several of the retailers. So maybe if we could kind of match make and get a developer and some of these retailers in a certain site, then that would be, one of our main goals. Next. We will continue to have weekly updates with Misha and the mayor, continued aggressive approach to get Sweetwater in front of all of these prospects, continued trade market and area and show representation, and then a long-term focus on grocer recruitment also, since we've gotten some feedback that that's going to be a priority. Next. And that's all. Retail recruitment is not a process. It's not an event, excuse me. We just want to be able to make sure that we are updating you all regularly, just as we are with our contacts, and that you know that it's not a 6-month solution to get retailers into the market. They like a site, but if it doesn't work out, then it may be another 6 months before they look at another site and pull the trigger on it. So it is a 1 to 2 to longer year process, but we're really excited about the responses that we've had in the market, and happy to answer any questions or anything that you guys have. All right. Well, I am going to leave my business cards with Misha, if that's okay. And you are welcome to contact me. My cell phone number is on there. I'm going to stay for a few minutes, and then I have to slip out and catch a flight. But I came in late Sunday and did a presentation yesterday, and then spent the day in the market yesterday looking at everything. And again, thank you so much for letting us work with you all and having the opportunity to work with Sweetwater.
I have a quick question.
Okay.
On any objections, is it just land not available, or is it price, or combination of each, or what?
Yes, all of the above. So yes, land not available is one thing. Some of these retailers obviously need interstate land. We would love to move them into downtown. We would love to move them more this way, but they need that traffic count, because that's who are going to be their regular customers. And there is land available, but not necessarily what they need. Again, with inflation and ground up cost for building, a lot of retailers need second generation space. So if we're looking at a national restaurant, which we'd love to get you guys, a sit down casual restaurant that, maybe serves beer or alcohol or something like that also, they're going to want a second generation space also that fits their needs. Instead of having to build ground up right now. And so there are a lot of different things. Maybe they looked at a site, but the landowner just really doesn't have to sell it right now, so it's too expensive, and they can move on and they can do a deal somewhere else. And then there's the feedback that we've gotten that Sweetwater's too small, it's not a market of interest right now. And then we always hear, well, thanks, but we're only focused on building out DFW, and then we'll take our brand further. So it's a variety of responses, but any feedback is good feedback to us, because it lets us know how to kind of shift our direction. Any other questions? Okay. Thank y'all so much.
Thank you. Okay, we'll now move to item 7A, which is discuss, consider, and act upon awarding bids for AC-10 and grade 4 crushed rock to be used for the fiscal year 2021-22 street seal coating project. Mr. Daniel.
I just wanted to note that if you approve the bids, that just means that they're approved. We will then have the ability to go out there and buy those materials in the best interests of the city. You'll notice another agenda item you'll have for additional materials for bid. So we'll take all of that into account as we move forward with the seal coat.
questions?
I'd move approval of low bids or the single bid for grade 4.
And a low bid on the 18?
Yes.
Okay. Do we have a second?
I'll second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carried and approved. Now move to item 7B, which is discuss, consider, and authorize soliciting bid for grade 4 Round Rock, CRS2, CRS2P, and fog seal to be used for the fiscal year 2021-22 street seal coating project. Any questions? Do we have a motion?
Make a motion to authorize soliciting bids for the grade 4 on Drought Rock.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carried and approved. Okay, we'll now move to item 7C, which is discuss, consider, and act upon awarding the highest bid for Oak Creek Lot number 524.
Move we accept the high bid for Oak Creek Lot. Was it 430? Is that the one? 4, or 524, excuse me.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carried and approved. Now move to item 7D, which is discuss, consider, and act upon a resolution of the City of Sweetwater suspending the June 17, 2022 effective date of Encore Electric Delivery Company's request rate change to permit the city time to study the request and establish reasonable rates, approving cooperation with the steering committee of cities served by Encore to legal counsel and consulting services, and to negotiate with the company and direct as necessary litigation and appeals, finding that the meeting at which this resolution is passed is open to the public as required by law, requiring notice of this resolution to the company and legal counsel for the steering committee.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
You just wanted to see if I could read that fast again. Resolution of the City of Sweetwater suspending the June 17, 2022 effective date of Encore Electric Delivery Company's request rate change to permit the city time to study the request and establish reasonable rates, approving cooperation with the steering committee of cities served by Encore to hire legal and consulting services and negotiate with the company and direct any necessary litigation and appeals, finding that the meeting at which this resolution is passed is open to the public and required by law, requiring notice of the resolution to the company and legal counsel for the steering committee. Okay, we'll now move to item 7E, which is discuss, consider, and act upon entering into an agreement with Tommy Morris Agency to act as a broker of record for insurance purposes and to evaluate competitive seal proposals for self-insured group health benefits to be considered at council meeting July the 12th, 2022 meeting. Nancy?
Good morning.
Good morning.
So this is our annual appointing of the Tommy Morris Agency to be your broker. And what will happen then is that we will go out the next 2 Sundays. We will post the public notice soliciting bids. And the deadline for them to be due back to the city will be Monday, July 11th. And then they'll be opened on July 11th, and they'll be presented and read into the minutes at your regular meeting on July 12th, with a deadline for the bid to be awarded at the meeting on August 9th. And so if that meets with your approval, that's the way we'll do it.
Do we have a motion?
Make a motion we enter an agreement with Tommy Morris Agency.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Motion carried and approved. Thank you, Nancy. We'll now move to item 7F, which is discuss, consider, and act upon an ordinance rezoning request from A dwelling district to B dwelling district for property described as Lot 13 through 15, Block 40, Southside Addition, Sweetwater, Nolan County, Texas, more commonly known as 1706 Sam Houston.
Mayor and Council, this is a rezoning request from A dwelling district to B dwelling district. It is actually by Martha and Fleet Lopez. This was considered by the Planning and Zoning Commission on the 6th of this month. They reviewed all of the information and recommend approval of this. I would also state that we sent out notices to neighboring property owners, and we did not receive any opposition to the request. So it's on Sam Houston. It's actually addressed as 1706, but it's some vacant lots there to one side of where we do have some property, and that's the hatched area right there. And that's really the request for the rezoning. And just so you know, this is kind of what they would like to put there. Typically, everything in B zone would be allowed on this property if you rezone it, but this is the intent right here, is to provide a manufactured home on the site, which is not allowed in A dwelling district, but it is allowed in B dwelling district. And so that was the reason for the request. So recommendation would be to approve the rezoning.
Any questions?
I make a motion, we accept the request and approve it.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Did you get that, Patty?
Yeah.
Now read the ordinance into the record. An ordinance amending Appendix A zoning ordinance of the Code of Ordinances of the City of Sweetwater, Texas to rezone lots 13 through 15, Block 40, Southside Addition, Sweetwater, Nolan County, Texas, more commonly known as 1706 Sam Houston, from an A dwelling district to B dwelling district. Okay, now move to item 7G, which is discuss, consider, and act upon approving to advertise and receive bids, proposals for construction of the Texas Water Development Board drinking water state revolving fund membrane replacement project at the water treatment plant. Mr. Sage.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor and Council. This item is seeking approval to go out for advertisement to solicit construction bids for the first project from the Water Development Board. We've recently received word from the review team that they are close to approving the plans. So close we can almost taste it. We are ready. So as soon as we get that approval, we would like to advertise the project, and this is seeking your approval to do so.
Any questions? Motion?
I make a motion, we approve and to advertise and receive bids on the proposal.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carried and approved. Okay, we now move to item 7H, which is discuss, consider, and act upon approval of Southwood Terrace Addition Phase 2 incentive. Ms. Misha.
Good morning.
Morning.
Thank y'all for having me. So we approved an incentive for the Phase 2 of Southwood Terrace, and the incentive is to assist them in the expansion of the required 8-inch water line for Phase 2. This was approved yesterday at our MDD Board of Directors meeting, and they have determined that this will promote or expand new business development in the city of Sweetwater. So, is there any questions? Or the max incentive amount is in $156,000. They must install all infrastructure, including roads and utilities, in order to receive the $156,600, and they still have to pour one more slab to access the final incentive payment for our Phase 1 incentive, which is $19,000.
How many lots are in the new proposal?
19.
I move approval of project contingent on the property owner initiating the process of voluntary annexation within 60 days.
Okay. Would you like annexation of only Phase 2 or all remaining lots? There, I believe, are 4 remaining lots in Phase 1, 3 or 4.
He is still owner of those properties?
Yes, yeah.
Then let's include those.
Okay.
I'll second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carried and approved. City manager's report.
Yes, sir. Sparks in the Park, we wanted to get word out, help get word out about this great upcoming event. It's going to be held on Monday, July 4th at Newman Park. So about 9:30 p.m.-ish is what you're putting out there, Karen?
Yes, it's just about,
Yeah.
regard, I mean, I've already, I would take
Yeah,
maybe he likes it.
good deal. So anything we can do as a city, let us know, and we're happy to help spread the word or whatever you need for us to do. The council created 4 corporal positions. So we did have 6 patrolmen test for those 4 slots. And these are the 4 corporals that were recently promoted into those positions: Chance Strickland, Caleb Norman, Clint Lewis, and Traven Berry. So I just wanted to make the council aware of that. Thank you for your support of adding the corporals, which also allowed us to add an assistant police chief to the ranks. So we're very appreciative of that, so thank you very much. And congratulations to the newly minted corporals. Police officers that were assisting in the Uvalde tragedy wanted to take this time to offer our thanks, Mondo, for you to leave everything in Sweetwater that you hold dear and take some time off and to head to Uvalde to try to help with the response out there. The call was made and you answered it, and so did Chris and Caleb, and we're very appreciative of that. Is there anything that you'd like to tell the group about your experience down in Uvalde?
Sure. Being able to go down to Uvalde, not only was it to help, the citizens and the police department and the operations that were going down there, but it was also a learning experience for the 3 of us that went, that we could actually bring back to our city, sit down with, our chief and our assistant chief and our lieutenant, and go over some things that we saw that, when it happens, because it seems like it's happening anywhere in places where people don't expect it to happen, that we're able to actually maybe mitigate some of the problems that we might run into by sitting down and planning, looking at things a little bit different, maybe coming up with some type of committee, between the police department, the schools, or anything that we might have that might arise that we can discuss and talk about, and hopefully in the future not have such a big problem like they were having down there. There was a lot of officers that were there from around the state, from different states came in and assisted. Manpower, of course, was number one problem that they were having. The president showing up and the security details for that. We got to be a security detail. We were field operations. We were the go-to between the officers in the field and the emergency operations center. So we got some exposure and experience into that as far as that whole process. So I mean, we were able to bring back quite a bit to our city, and we're going to sit down and have a roundtable discussion about things that we need to look at and things that might not, we might not think about, but we saw down there. So other than that, we really appreciated being able to go and help out. So appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
We appreciate you, Mondo, and the rest of the staff that took time out. Chief, thank you for letting them head down that way.
Yes, sir.
Very much appreciated. Let's see here. We're going to switch over to the final city manager's report item. Talk a little bit about recent demolition projects. We can get that up. This is a home at 114 Fisher. You see the before and after picture, such an improvement. And so this is something that has been ongoing. We've been doing this for the last several years with the assistance of the MDD. Misha, please express our thanks to your board for allowing us to do this. You'll see the 401 West Texas home that was demolished as well, the before and after pictures. 704 East 12th Street, right across from the high school. Looks a heck of a lot better. 511 East 12th Street. 706 Robert Lee. 200 Walnut. So just some examples of some of the work that's been done by Dana and their crews. We appreciate everything that y'all have done to try to help clean up the city. And I think that's a big project. That's an important project. We want to project the best type of image that we can to those looking to come into Sweetwater and expand. And Carolyn, you just talked to us a little bit about that. I think some of this stuff goes hand in hand with expansion and recruitment to try to get folks interested in Sweetwater. And so, unless Dana, you have anything to add?
We got a few more to go.
Just a few, right? Just a few. So, Mr. Mayor, that's all we have.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll now move into the budget workshop, which is to hear the water utility presentation.
Good morning again to everyone. We'll run through these slides and give you an update on the utility system projects, kind of status of where we are as far as water supplies, protection of water supplies, projects we have ongoing that are planned, some of the new TCQ regulations, and then efforts to retain and recruit operators for the water and wastewater plants and distribution and collection system. So this slide here, we look at this each year and it kind of tells us the status of the lakes. As you can see over the last couple of years, the percentage of full or percent full has decreased. In 2020 there at Oak Creek we're at 91%. Down to 75 in 21, and then we're currently at around 62% here in 22. I will say that Sweetwater is well positioned. Folks before us put the city in a good spot, having a surface water option and a groundwater option. There's a lot of communities in Texas that don't have that option, and that was well planned and puts Sweetwater in good position to make decisions and be prepared for the cyclical droughts that the state of Texas goes through and that we go through out here in West Texas. If you have any questions on this slide or anything, please interrupt me if you do. A couple of photos here from 22 and 19, just showing the difference in full lake and where we currently are. Always looks better to have lots more water out there. Really looks nice to have it going over the spillway. I mentioned the cyclical periods of drought. This graphic here kind of shows that. Up and down, up and down. And I did a little calculation. In the left side of this chart is actually the reservoir storage in thousands of acre feet, which Oak Creek max full is projected to have around 39 to 40,000 acre feet. And I believe it was in 2003. By that chart, it shows that we got down to about 13%. 12.5% was the lowest based upon that chart. Another graph showing the levels there in Oak Creek, how quickly it can recharge. That's always a good thing to see that line go upward quickly. A couple more photos here. 2021, we're at 4.3 feet below the spillway, and currently, or as of May 10th, we were at 7.25 feet below the spillway.
Sage, at what point, percentage-wise on Oak Creek, do we quit pulling water from the lake?
I'm sorry, say that again.
How far down does that lake have to get before we drop?
So the drought contingency plan, the phase, and I'll state it. It's like I said, with Sweetwater having surface water and groundwater, you're in a good position. But stage 1 is at 10 feet. Is that correct? 10 feet low. 10 feet below the spillway is stage 1, but the plan also states that's if the well field production can't keep up with demand. And so just because we get to 10 feet doesn't necessarily mean the city has to initiate stage 1 drought restrictions, because you also have the well field. Stage 2, level in the lake is 15.5 feet, and then I think it's 18 feet at stage 3, but there again, the well field is a vital part of your overall water supply. So we've spoken about water supply. Once it gets into the system, it's very vital to be good stewards of the water we have in distribution and reduce number of water leaks. That's one reason we're always pursuing funding for replacing water lines. Some of the older ductile iron, cast iron type lines, they have well exceeded their service life, and so we have numerous line leaks throughout the year. In fact, crews fixed 73 leaks in calendar year 2021. Each year we assist the city with a water loss audit, and as more and more of these water lines are being replaced, that water loss percentage is on the downward trend, which is a good thing. It's what we want to see. One item to note as far as a major leak, Labor Day 2021, there was a leak on an 18-inch line. We lost an estimated 1.5 million gallons that's on 9/6 and 9/7. But the key thing is that the water crews were able to fix that leak within 24 hours, and that's on an 18-inch line. That is good response. You can see there the uptick in the production out of the high service pump station. That water was going out, leaving the system quickly, and crews did a good job of responding quickly and getting that fixed just as fast as possible. 18-inch lines they're difficult to work on. More information on protection of the water supplies. The staff, Eddie and his guys, they're always looking at ways of maintaining the system, investing some budget money into pump and motor maintenance, rehabbing wells, extending the life of the membranes. If you'll recall, the prior membranes that were installed at the water treatment plant, they lasted approximately 14 years. Typically, they last 7 to 10. And that is solely due to the maintenance that's routinely formed by staff out there in the cleaning process at the plant. A couple other things that are in the works. There's a conjunctive use study that's ongoing, looking at the well field safe yields, looking at the safe yield of the surface water, continually to maximize and find the most optimized balance of utilizing those sources. Membrane cleaning is ongoing. Chemical use and jar testing, all those things helped to optimize the system. Rising costs, we all know it. Everything that we're seeing in purchasing of supplies and equipment is going up. That's a constant challenge. Hopefully, we'll see some relief in that maybe towards the end of the year. I've heard that, but who knows? I kind of thought we would have seen it already. But citric acid has increased 75%. The reagents no longer available. Pumps and motors, they have sometimes 14, 18 months just to get them here. And that doesn't even include the increased cost. So That's a constant challenge for all entities across the state as far as water and wastewater utilities. Water production and distribution. Council just approved the item to, once the Water Development Board approves the plans, to go out for bids to do the phase 2 of the membrane replacement. A few years ago we did phase 1. This will be phase 2. That's upgrading the Suez submerged membranes from the C's to the D, which is a newer type membrane. Emergency power generation. We are under construction at Highland Pump Station for a 150 kilowatt generator. We are actually, the contractor has done what they can do on site. Now we are awaiting delivery of the generator, and it has experienced some delays. It's not to be unexpected. We were hoping to kind of get in before the big wave, because some of the state funding out there, all of these entities are buying generators. And so we are on the front end. Eddie and staff were really good about pushing that forward, but still we're facing some delays on delivery of the generator. Under construction there at the water plant on the 900 kilowatt Caterpillar generator. We haven't heard any delays on that one just yet. Fingers crossed we won't, but they're moving forward with that project. And then the mobile generators that were procured for the well fields, we have been told by the provider that they are experiencing some delays on those. Those are 6 mobile trailer mounted generators, but we're hoping that delay is not too significant. Currently, the recoating at the groundwater, or at the ground storage tank clear well at the water plant. I believe at the end of this week we should be doing final inspection on that recoating project. So that's it looks really good too. The contractor has done a really nice job. Remote site work at Booster A and Booster B from Oak Creek. So we have Oak Creek Lake, we have the raw water pump station, and then it pumps it to A, and then A pumps it to B, and then B pumps it to the plant. So those pump stations are due for some upgrades and pump upgrades. Those costs will be funded through the Water Development Board as a separate project after the membrane replacement project. Water line replacement, there's also Water Development Board money for continually replacing water lines. The way that kind of the strategy there is, we're going to address the membranes, we're going to address the pump stations, and then the funds that are left over, we'll try to get as many water lines replaced as possible. There is a little bit of a expectance that our bid prices will be a little higher than we expected 2 years ago when the application process started. Hopefully we had enough contingency in there to accommodate for that, but it's just we're seeing that on a lot of projects. The GP waterline transmission project, project is taking longer than anticipated. It is going well. The big long bore along I-20 is taking longer than anticipated. Some of it due to supplies, equipment problems. Some of the railroad excavation over there, they got into the line that had already been installed. The contractor went over and helped repair that, replace that section, and GP's helping to pay for that cost, because that was a totally separate issue. But there's just been some challenges on the project, but I am told by the contractor they are anticipating to pull the line through the bore next week. Once that's done, we'll make tie-ins and start doing disaffection and flushing, and so we're very close, and a lot of progress has been made. We're very close to getting that one put into service. A little bit more on the membrane replacement. Phase 1 was 4 MGD at the plant. This is going to be phase 2, which is the final 4 MGD. The membranes have been purchased. We were notified by Suez that they were just like everything else as far as shortage of supplies. If the membranes were available, and if the city was able to go ahead and pre-purchase those, you could go ahead and get them delivered. If not, they could not commit to when they would be available again. And so therefore, Eddie worked with David in financing and getting all that done. Membranes have been purchased. They're being stored appropriately at the plant. And then once the Water Development Board funds are released, that money will be reimbursed. and then this contract would go to hire a contractor to install them. Yeah, so again, we had some contingency in what our cost estimation was for the construction portion of the project, and we're hoping that will be sufficient. But as soon as we get the bids in, we'll be able to come back to council and explain all that, where we stand. One little item I wanted to explain to you, the value of your staff at the water plant. These new membranes will require less aeration, and so we had started looking at ways of throttling the blowers that provide the aeration to the filters. You could either replace the blowers or you could throttle the flow. And one thing that staff came up with a good solution was to vent off some of that air into train 5. And so you can see there one of the way that diffuser was installed, and that will release excess air from the blowers into that train 5. And so that it was a huge cost savings. I mean, we're talking about over $100,000 to change out the blowers and modulate that flow, the airflow. And this option here was really a good fix, and it was 10% of the cost. It was done in coordination with Suez, the membrane manufacturer, so all the flows, all the calcs, all that stuff was gone through. Dave Baker, our operations specialist, worked with staff, and it was a really good solution. So it was a great cost savings to the overall project. Senate Bill 3 was passed by the state legislature after the big freeze that we had. It basically came out and said that the utilities have to be able to maintain a minimum of 20 psi in the distribution system for more than 24 hours. So what that did is that put a big rush on buying backup generators. So if we had loss of power, in theory, the cities would have generators on site to run their pumps and treat water, get it up into elevated storage and maintain that pressure out in the system. Therefore, we've worked with the city, and all these projects for these generators are ongoing. And I would say from the other entities I've seen, Sweetwater is out in front of a lot of entities in the state. This is a few photos out there at Highland Pump Station and the generator that will go in at that location. So the mobile generators will be available to power the wells. The wells will pump it to the Highland Pump Station. This generator here will be able to supply the pumps. The pumps will get it to the treatment plant. Treatment plant, if loss of power, would have a generator there that would power the treatment process, the high service pump station, and then up into the elevated tank, and you maintain 20 psi in the system. Always the challenge is that generators are mechanical pieces of equipment, just like lawnmowers, just like cars. They take maintenance and upkeep, and you need to be ready when you need them. So that's always the challenge. But you wouldn't have that capability if you didn't have the generator there. So that's a good thing. Clearwell recoating, spoke about that. The final cost on that should be about $142,000. It was last painted in the early 2000s, so it was time. Raw water pump stations I spoke about are going to be upgrading the VFDs and the pumps, motors there. The electrical is quite aged, needs to be addressed, so we're going to clean all that up. One good thing about putting these pumps on, or these motors on VFDs, is that they kind of fluctuate with demand. So they're reading the level in the tank up here, and as the level in this tank goes down, these pumps will ramp up and send more water. And then as this level is getting higher, it'll kind of ramp down, and so they kind of float on the system. It's the way that the high service pump station is set up with the elevated tank now, and it works really well. Water line replacement in the Water Development Board project. Several streets that have been identified. Right now there's about $750,000 budgeted. Hopefully we don't have to get into that money to fund these other two projects, but it may happen. but that equates to about 6,000 linear feet. The GP water line, just a quick little slide there showing the overall length. It's about 23,000 linear feet of 12-inch HDPE line. So that's a jointless line, no joints in it, so that should reduce leaks over time. It's a durable pipe. And actually, when we bid this project, the HDPE was more cost competitive than the PVC and more readily available. So that pricing-wise, that has turned out really good. A few more photos there on the GP project, nearing completion, and talked about having to repair one section of the line that was damaged by the railway excavation. A few challenges on there, but it is very close to completion. It's going to be a really good project for the city. So that was all on the water side. On the wastewater side, there are Water Development Board funds that we are working with right now. There will be collection system improvements. There's creek crossing there at Neff and Lewis, and then also Crane Street from 12th to 5th. So those were the kind of the ongoing projects. Future water projects, water line replacement, that's an ongoing deal. Lake Trammell concrete repairs. TCQ inspects the dam ever so often, and there have been identified that there are some necessary repairs there. The concrete around the spillway and on the wing walls need to be repaired. I know Eddie's been kind of looking for some potential grant funds. There are some out there, but they usually take a match, so we're trying to assist on finding some funding to help with those improvements. We approached council 1 or 2 meetings ago about kind of developing some RFPs for the AMI meter replacement project. So we're currently working on those. We'll be working with staff on different technologies or types of meters that we want to put in that RFP, and then it'll be advertised and then receive the proposals. We'll come back to council and explain all that, and then the city will be able to make an informed decision on a path forward on that project. Back to the proposed wastewater projects. This is still through the Water Development Board. This will be improvements at the wastewater treatment plant. A lot of equipment out there that is starting to age out and needing to be replaced. So there, the SBR, the waste activated sludge piping replacements, screening, solids handling, all that type of stuff will be handled in that project. And so we're currently working on environmental approval with the Water Development Board for that project. Then we'd move into the design and then on to bidding. For regulatory compliance, seems like TCQ is requiring more and more testing in the system. Lead, copper, water quality parameters. We had to do this after we replaced the membranes last time. Most likely they're going to require us to do it again. It doesn't make sense. We're putting in the same membranes. We're not changing chemicals. We're not doing any of that. We're going to request that they allow us to not have to do that additional testing. I mean, it equates to $35,000, and in our opinion, is not necessary. We're gonna try to get that approved, not have to go through that process. Operation and maintenance. We're currently working with staff on developing O&M manuals for all parts of the city, all part of the system. That would be the groundwater production, surface water production, distribution, wastewater collection, and wastewater treatment. Basically, the way that I see this, in a way, is a transfer of knowledge. You want to be able to, if one of your operators that controls a part of the system, something happens or he's no longer here, whatever, you want to be able to hire a new person to come in, and he has a good O&M manual right there that is a roadmap on how to operate equipment, what set points are necessary, how that fluctuates with seasonal changes. So we're going through and documenting with staff input all the parameters that would be necessary to train people in the future. And we see it all the time in other entities that doesn't get done, and someone's been there for 40 years and has all the knowledge, and then they leave, and it is problematic for the folks after them. And Eddie and his staff are doing a really good job of trying to set those up and document how the system is operated and operates efficiently. I touched on this, Senate Bill 3. It requires that the city implement an emergency preparedness plan, EPPs. So we've been assisting the city with meeting these deadlines. You identify the critical water and wastewater facilities back in November of 2021. That was done. March 1st, the emergency preparedness plan had to be submitted along with a timeline for implementation. That was in March. That was done. And then by July 1st, the plan has to start implementation, which the city has already done by purchasing these generators and constructing, putting those in place. So city is compliant with those requirements. There's a few options there for meeting those requirements. There's backup generators, redundant interconnectivity. You could have increased tank size on in certain areas. The generators have been discussed in years past, and this was a good opportunity to get those done, and so we're making good progress there. Water and wastewater operators, we've talked about this in years past in the budget retreats that they're harder and harder to find, and so the city is doing a good job of recruiting and retaining the folks with licenses and encouraging those licenses or the staff to go get licensed and raise the level of their license through incentives, certification bonuses, merit raises. That's a challenge across the state of being able to find good qualified operators, and the city is doing a good job of doing that. The conjunctive use, water use study, that's kind of a fancy term that we use for the balance between the surface water and the groundwater. I talked about that. There's currently an ongoing study to go out and model the groundwater aquifer out in the west part of the system and look for additional availability and what that looks like as far as the firm yield, the safe yield. Also looking at Oak Creek, just bringing all that information into a good report so that the city can then plan accordingly. And if that if that means going out and finding new well fields or additional water supplies, then this will be a good planning report to base those decisions upon. One item to note, and I think I've got it here, but the Oak Creek line, the water line is getting quite aged, and the city has leaks on it ever so often. And so at some point, to maintain that surface water source, that transmission line will have to be evaluated, and that will be a sizable project. A couple of options on what can be done there, whether you parallel, you slip line, but all that will kind of be the information from this conjunctive use study will be useful in determining how that surface water source is utilized going forward and what improvement projects would be warranted. So spoke about the well field expansion. These are future water supply options, something that always kind of needs to be on the table and evaluated. In the regional water plan, Sweetwater is shown to have an interconnect with the city of Abilene. Doesn't mean you have to, doesn't mean you will, just showing that it's a viable option. The city of Abilene is out pursuing some long-term water sources through the West Texas Partnership. They actually executed a contract for some groundwater out in West Texas back in May of 2020. And so, Abilene is trying to position themselves as a regional water supplier, which they currently are, but that would be an option on the table for consideration in the future. One good thing about having it in the regional water plan is that sets the stage for funding. There's SWIFT money out there, there's SRF money out there, there's different funding sources, and if it is a project that is listed in the state water plan, that just helps it qualify better for funding. There again, doesn't mean that it'll ever happen, or it may happen, but right now it is just in the plan as a 30,000 foot overview option that would be available in the future if the city so chose. Last slide here, just talking about the cost of water. Any budgeting process, personal budgeting, commercial or business budgeting, you need to know what the actual cost of your product is. Staff has done a really good job of going in and looking at the electrical cost of pumpage, looking at chemical costs, looking at staff costs, looking at all that good stuff, and bringing that down to a per 1,000 gallon unit so that budgeting and planning can be done. And right there it shows on the water side right now, and this is variable based upon equipment, chemical cost and electricity cost, all that kind of varies, but a good number right now is $8.07 per 1,000 on the water side and $3.20. The cost is $3.68 per 1,000 on the wastewater and $6.62 per 1,000 on the water treatment side. I believe that is the last slide. Are there any questions that I hopefully could answer? Hope that was informative. If y'all ever have any questions, I'm here fairly often and always available. Thank y'all very much for the time.
Thanks,
Thank you
Dave.
for the presentation. We're ready for you now, right?
Ready? All right. Thank you, Sage, for that. Appreciate it. A lot of good info there. Want to continue on the theme of today's workshop is the budget and how we pose to fund some of these projects that Sage was talking about and other projects that I'll talk a little bit about as well. So I want to thank you all for having me here to update y'all on the fiscal year 22 budget, the one we're currently in, and then also looking ahead to fiscal year 23. Like we like to start every meeting, want to start off with going over the mission and the values. We lead with trust and respect to provide a vibrant, secure community for all. When we bring people on board to the city organization during their interviews with us, when we're looking at the budget, when we're looking at projects, when we're looking at just about everything, we focus on the reasons why we're here, which is the mission. And then the corresponding values of professionalism, integrity, continuous improvement, and teamwork. And so while we're talking about teamwork, I want to thank Patty for her help in putting this budget presentation together. And it couldn't have happened as well with the other team members, the director's team, coming together to research some projects and research some financing numbers and those kinds of things. So this was very much a team effort, and I want to thank everybody for their efforts to get this to the point where we are today. Well, we'll start off with all of the funds, kind of that 30,000 foot view, hone in on the general fund and the water utility fund, other items of interest. We'll talk a little bit about the budget calendar. And if y'all have any questions at the end, that would be the time to go ahead and ask either myself or the staff. All right, here we go. Fiscal year 22 revenues, all funds. These are budgeted amounts. We don't have the actuals yet. We won't have them until after the end of the fiscal year. But taxes are up there at 7.8 million. Charges for services, mostly on the wastewater side, of about $14 million. Intergovernmental sources, about $2 million. Miscellaneous of about 5.3, and transfers in about 1.8. So a total fiscal year 22 budgeted revenues for all of the funds of the city are about $31.2 million. On the expenditure side, you've got for fiscal year 22, all funds, the budgeted amounts again. Personnel services, it costs a lot of money to employ the folks that we employ, but they're the ones that do the work. So that's that goes without saying. About $3 million. Contractual services about $12 million. Capital outlay of close to $5 million. Debt service of right around 2.1, and transfers out about 1.8. So total fiscal year 22 expenditures for all funds about $35 million. Focusing a little bit more on the general fund, we've got your fiscal year 22 revenue on the general fund. The taxes are going to be the biggest sources of the revenue, of course. That's sales taxes and property taxes at a little over $7 million. Charges for services about 1.8, miscellaneous about 1.4, and transfers in about $750,000 or so. So a fiscal year 22 general fund revenue budgeted amount of about a total of about $11.4 million. And you'll see that graphically here represented on the pie chart. The taxes are the biggest slice of that pie at 62%. You've got your charges per services about 16%, your transfers in about 7%, intergovernmental about 1%. Sales tax revenue, of course, the revenue is really made up of the sales tax and the property tax. We'll talk a little bit about sales tax for now. You see that represented graphically here on the bar chart between 2018 and the current year of 2022. Hovering about 2.7, 2.8 or so, hit a pretty good amount last year of 3.1, and then we're on track this year for about $3.6 million. You'll see here on this table, we've got the amounts coming in from October to April, and we're estimating the amounts from May through September being what you see on the table versus what they're budgeted. The budget amount we were looking at for fiscal 22 was $2.92 million on the sales tax side. We're hoping to end up about $3.6 million, which is an increase of close to $700,000 from what is budgeted. Again, those numbers aren't final. They won't be final until really next fiscal year, but we're hoping to see an increase of about $700,000 versus what we budgeted for sales tax. On the property tax, we'll look at the rates from us compared to our 16 peer cities in the region, and then by population as well. You'll see that we're in the bottom half as far as property tax rates go at 54.8 cents per $100 evaluation. We're kind of in that bottom 25% group with Bronx, Stephenville, Snyder, and then of course us. All the way up to Breckenridge, which is a little over $1 per $100 evaluation on the property. And so that's a big amount. The average rate for these 16 peer cities of ours is about 66 cents per 100. And so I think the takeaway from this slide is that we've got some capacity to add debt, and we'll be talking a little bit about that as my presentation goes along. And Andrew, thank you for being here this morning. We'll kind of hone in a little bit on that point that we want to make, is that we've got capacity to add debt on the general fund side. We don't have any debt currently on the general fund side, which is a little unusual for a city. So everything that we have, all the 54.8 cents goes to maintenance and operations. On the general fund side, we don't have anything for debt service. I bet most of these cities probably have some amount of their tax rate dedicated to interest and sinking to debt service. And so we're probably one of the few on this list and throughout the state that doesn't carry any debt on the general fund side. In my opinion, that needs to change, and we can talk a little bit more about that as we go through this presentation and then once Andrew gets up here. But again, the average rate is about 66 cents. We're at 54.8, so there's capacity there to carry some debt and to increase the maintenance and operations rate as well. The preliminary appraisal roll, there's a lot of numbers on this. I'll try to simplify it as best as I can. In the tax year 2021, the certified total market value was $674 million. The preliminary tax year total market value right now is about $762.5 million. That's market rate. The total appraised is a little bit less than that. 515 for last year, 587 for this year. You take away the exemptions on each of those years, you end up with a net taxable value in 2021 of close to about $500 million on the property side versus the preliminary numbers, and those are probably going to go down once the protests come in and all things are settled. We'll find out in July. But right now, that preliminary number that we've been given by the appraisal district is $578 million, which is an increase of about $81 million for net taxable value of all the property in Sweetwater. If you multiply that, if you divide it by 100 and multiply it by our current tax rate of 54.8 cents, you end up with a tax levy in 2021 of about $2.7 million. And that's just the amount of revenue that we get from property taxes. That's what we end up with. 2.7 in tax year 2021, and we're looking at if all things stay the same as far as the tax rate goes, and based upon the preliminary numbers that we have to date, $3.2 million is what our tax levy would be for tax year 22, an increase of about $440,000 is what we're looking at bringing in. The no new tax rate would, if we wanted to stick to the tax levy that we brought in 2021, that $2.7 million number, based upon the preliminary net taxable value of $578 million, our tax rate would go down to 47.1 cents in order to bring in that $2.7 million again in 22 that we brought in 2021. The preliminary voter approved tax rate, we could go all the way up to about 69 cents without trigger, going up to 69 cents would trigger a rollback election. The voters could say that's too much. We want to bring it down again, and so that they could vote on that. So if you wanted to avoid any kind of election on that, you would set the tax rate just below 68.8 cents. I hope that makes sense. It's kind of hard to explain, but that's the best I could do. So that's kind of where we are on the property tax side with the preliminary appraisal rolls. We should get those final numbers, Patty, in, I believe, at the end of July or so. So a little, just a summary on the revenue side, with the general fund sales tax, the next sales tax allocation report will be due to the city on July 11th. Staff will continue to monitor impacts of sales tax revenue, and like our citizens and those that we serve in the market area that Caroline talked about earlier, we got folks coming in from all over the region, coming in and doing their shopping here in Sweetwater. We encourage folks to stop. And that's been happening because we've got our sales tax kind of on the upswing, which is a good thing. On the property tax side, the certified tax roll will be due to all the entities by July 25th of this year, and the effective and the rollback rates will be calculated by that same date. A little bit on fiscal 22 on the expenditure side. These are budgeted amounts. We spend by function the most on public safety, which is not unusual for a city any size, anywhere. Public safety is going to be your biggest expenditure in the general fund by far, typically. Public works at about $1.275 million. Non-departmental about a little over $750. For a total general fund expenditure for fiscal 22 budgeted amount of about $11.4 million. You see that represented here in this pie chart. You see public safety at about 57% of total general fund expenditures go to police and fire, which again is not unusual. That's about how it works. General government at 14%, public works at about 11%, culture and recreation 8%, airport at 3%, and non-departmental at 7%. Okay, now we're getting to the good stuff here. The fiscal year 22 unanticipated expenses. This is akin to, in your personal budget, your car AC breaking down. It's unexpected, but you got to do it. You got to pay for it. You get a hailstorm in, you got to pay that deductible to get a new roof on it. It's very much the same with the city and the expenses that we incur. There's stuff that we can anticipate and budget for, and there's stuff that just pops up. And this is a list of the stuff that just popped up. The fire chief recruitment, we did not expect Chief Madden to retire this past year, but he did, and so we spent $26,400 on a recruiting firm to come in and help us with that recruitment. That is offset by the salary savings that we've realized without having a chief in that position. So we're not paying a chief salary, so we can afford to kind of turn around and pay for that recruitment. That salary savings would pay that amount. Public safety personnel and classification changes of about $35,000. Firehouse updates, partially donated funds. The donated funds that we received from our anonymous donor paid for some portion of that, so we're grateful to them for that. Police education and travel at $40,000. Tasers, car and body cameras, video storage, simulator training bundle at $110,000. The Sweetwater Station project and all that went into that at about $24,000. Change in accounting software, which we're currently going through. I think I sent you all a text about that yesterday, trying to keep you all informed on that, at about $33,000. 3 police SUVs that were picked up with, again, the donated funds by the anonymous donor, $177,400 on that. And then the animal control truck with the box that's required right at $60,000. Again, those were picked up with or paid for with the donated funds. So a total of $521,000 in unanticipated expenses in this fiscal year. And the next several slides are the fiscal year 23 budget requests. These are requests that the staff has made of myself and the council. We're hoping to try to find a way to put in the budget for 23. Sometimes it takes a couple of cycles for these projects to get funded. They don't get funded in the year that requested. They get funded in year 2 or year 3. That's just the way it goes for some of these projects. But we want to start off with the merit-based pay for all non-civil service employees, averaging 3.3%. We had been on a across-the-board type of program for many, many years, and until last year we switched to a merit-based program. So if you deserve 3.3, that's what, and your director thinks that's what you deserve, that's what you're going to get. If you deserve a little more than that, we're open to providing the employee with that amount. We want it to be based on merit and not just everybody get the same. We think that's good for morale and good for a lot of reasons. So that's what we're hoping to do as we move forward into 23, like we did in 22. 2 additional police dispatchers at about $130,000. I know we hired some dispatchers recently, Chief, and we've come to the realization that we just need more. I think the Uvalde experience, trying to learn from some of what happened down there. Dispatches, they're first responders as well, our dispatchers. And so we've got to do everything that we can to make sure that they're fresh and they're ready to go and not tired and exhausted from long days sitting behind the computer screen, answering those calls and directing those calls to our police and fire. And so we want to try to add 2 additional dispatchers if we can. The street seal coat for fiscal year 22, we took care of some of those items related to that project this morning. We want to continue that project in fiscal 23 and beyond at a cost of about $160,000 for 23. Cemetery software, we've got 1 firefighter at about $75,000, 1 additional patrolman at about $80,000. 3 police vehicles. I think we're to the point where we're really going to start trying to purchase vehicles on an annual basis. So that's where we are with our rolling stock, with our fleet. And so purchasing 3 in fiscal year 23, I think will get us through the next fiscal year. But in 24, Chief, we're probably going to come back and ask for an additional 2, 3, 4 vehicles. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Street water and refuse pickups and trailers at about 130. A brush truck for the fire department at 200. Parks department equipment. This is a mower, a grinder, a trailer at about $30,000. Water department compressor and residential generators at $37,000. A backhoe with an extension boom at $125,000. A street sweeper, ours, the current one we have rolling right now, is kind of on its last legs, Dana, at $325,000 for that street sweeper. And then I don't want to go through all of them, but the Pioneer Museum, I met with Leslie Bennett last week, and she's requesting about $35,000 for some AC upgrades. Right now they're dealing with no AC. With these temperatures, it's just kind of a sauna in there at present time. Service center covered parking lot for the assets, about $100,000. Of course, Mr. Ludlam was here last month to give an update on the municipal auditorium and some of the improvements that they're looking to make. Again, I think that's with the AC as well. So about $15,000 for that. I think the auditorium board would put up the remainder. I think 15 represents half of what they need, if I remember correctly. The same thing with the Pioneer Museum. We're going to approach the county. I need to call the judge on that to see if they wouldn't mind splitting that $35,000 cost with the city. Snap walk-in freezer and condenser and evaporator, right around $16,000. Airport lighting improvements, 120. Drainage improvements at 15. The Creekside Street construction. There's a portion of that development that the city would be responsible for. It's a small portion of a street to complete the roadway through that development. Our costs would be about $50,000. That's not something that we're passing along to the developer because we feel it's more our responsibility than the developer's responsibility. So that would be at a cost of about $50,000. Newman Park All Abilities Playground Equipment. We got $150,000 in donated funds for that project. I think it'll be a good project. We would move the current playground equipment that's at Newman to some of the other parks, so that way we don't have to scrap them. They're still in usable condition, but we'd like to see some upgrades there on the playground equipment in Newman. And then the fitness exercise court, we're looking at a total of about $142,000. We're hoping that Seed would pick up the majority, if not all of that, Nisha, so we can talk about that.
The Creekside Street extension or funds you were talking about, is that going to be on what street, or will that be the extension of Grant?
The extension of Grant.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. And then you've got 3 EMS department striker stair chairs at $25,500. Let's see here. The Jones Park softball lighting at $130,000. The new pro shop roof over at the golf course of about $18,000. New bathhouse roof at the swimming pool of $14,000. The Highland VFD pump, Stage talked a little bit about that this morning. Lake Trammell Dam repairs at $25,000. That's ongoing. 3 well transfer switches at $20,000. Purification plant equipment and SCADA upgrades at $415,000. That's kind of a costly one. Wastewater plant equipment and SCADA upgrades at the sewer plant, $330,000. Those are rather costly. Police department training and education at $25,000. The Power DMS, which as I understand it, Chief, is kind of a suite of software services for training and for scheduling and those types of things. And evaluations.
Community input. Basically, when we implement it, if we were able to get it, after one of our officers go to a call, within a couple hours we'll set the parameters where we'll get an automated message from our department asking how we did.
Yes.
That way we can start evaluating our services and we're providing to the community. They'll be able to give us feedback. That'll also help us with our accreditation program.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that. And we're currently spending some amount on similar type of a program. The cost for this would be about $12,000. That's our net cost. And then active shooter simulator, we had talked about a $30,000 type unit, but now you're saying that we can get that cost down to about $5,000.
Yes, sir. We found a company that we're currently using, which is Axon, that does our body cams and our tasers, and they provide a service that they'll bundle into our deal that was much cheaper.
Yes.
And it'll also upgrade as new software comes in.
Very good. All right, thank you, Brian. For a total estimated cost of fiscal year 23 budget requests of about $5.2 million, that's a big number there. We can't just write a check and pay for it out of our quote-unquote checking account, our maintenance and operations. I wish we could. I wish we were in that kind of position, but we can't. So most likely we'll have to issue debt for some of these projects, and like I said, we'll continue to have those conversations with the council. I think it's very important. There's a lot of numbers on here. I'll try to make it simplified as best as I can. The current fund balance, year to date, as of April 30th, on the general fund, you got the beginning fund balance of about $3.5 million.
You got transfers in, transfers out. Your ending fund balance of about 4.4 year to date as of April 30th. That's an increase for these 7 months of about close to $1 million, a little over 900,000. Now our financial policy says that we've got to keep 25% of our expenditures, previous fiscal year expenditures, set aside. So we shouldn't touch that. That number comes out to be $2.7 million. We have an amount above that $2.7 million of 1.6. So I hope that makes sense. So the ending fund balance is 4.4. The 25% that we've got to keep as per our policy is the 2.7, and the amount that we have above the 2.7 is 1.6. I hope that makes sense. And so that's just saying we've got a little capacity if we needed to spend some money from our fund balance in the general fund. On the water and sewer side, we always do pretty well there. Unrestricted funds and savings of about 7.4 million. On the EMS side, we're in the red, and that's not a surprise. I'm talking to a consultant right now that we're trying to get them to, I want to get them to come in and kind of evaluate our EMS, really on the operation side, but really more on the financial side. See if there's anything that we can do differently to try to get those numbers closer to zero. I'm not saying that EMS needs to be an enterprise where we're making tons of money all the time, but as long as we're not losing any, if we're at a break-even standpoint, I'd be happy with that. But we're just not quite there yet, and I think we need some help. On the refuse side, $568,000 is our ending fund balance as of the end of April. Budget issues in the general fund, the impact of the sales tax, we need people to keep shopping Sweetwater. I think it's important, and when they do, you see the results of that. It's to our benefit that people shop here, and like I said, we're doing pretty well on the sales tax side, and we hope that continues into the future. Review the general fund balance, review the property tax rate. We'll end up somewhere hopefully between the rollback rate and where we are now. Extensive review of all rates, fees, and fines. Looking back on this past fiscal year, there were several instances where especially Dana and Eddie have brought tweaks to our fee schedule ordinance. So that's kind of our way of always being on top of what we're charging people, and when we need to tweak something, y'all have been very supportive of that, so we appreciate that very much.
David?
Yes, sir.
On that point, I would suggest or consider reviewing some of our interlocal agreements that we have. We're talking, had a request for a $200,000 brush truck, and to fight fires out in the county, and we might need to review some of those interlocal agreements and see if maybe we could possibly renegotiate.
Okay.
For the county at least assist with the purchase of some of that equipment.
That's a good thought. Thank you for sharing that. We'll do that. We'll do that. Water and sewer rate increase for bond projects, and then funding solutions for future capital projects. On the water utility side, it's a little more straightforward there. We've got the water and wastewater summary for fiscal year 2022. The current fiscal year that we're in. On the revenue side, we've got about $8 million coming in revenues, expenses of about 11.3, unreserved of about 22.5 million in the water fund, and the reserved amount is about 2.25 million. On revenues and other financing sources for water and the wastewater fund, fiscal 22, these are budgeted amounts. The vast majority of that is going to be what we charge for water and sewer rates. About $7.8 million out of a total of about 8.1 million. Our top 10 water consumers, City of Drought, and I hate getting into the slide because it just makes me angry every time we look at it, but it is what it is. The consumption the City of Drought purchased from the City of Sweetwater is about 118 million gallons of water, and they paid a whopping $6,200 for it. That's because they pay, I think, 5 cents a thousand. Eddie, is that right? But that's contractual, and I don't know that there's anything we can do to get out of that, and I'm not sure when that expires, but it's not soon enough. It never does. It's in perpetuity, so there you go. And then we've got the other, kind of rounding off some of the users, the top 10 users of water, USG, Georgia Pacific, the cities of Roby and Trent, the Housing Authority, et cetera, the hospital. Comparison of the water rates to the average peer population, cities between 10,000 and 15,000 population, where we fall. We've got 13 cities that responded to this TML survey, Sweetwater being one of them. The peer average on the residential side, on the water side, for 5,000 and 10,000 gallons, we are 3% over the peer group at the 5,000 gallon consumption, and we are 27% over the peer group at the 10,000 gallon consumption. On the sewer side, for our peer group, we are 25% over on the residential side, 5,000 gallon consumption, and 16% over the peer group at the 10,000 gallon rate. On the water side, commercial, 50,000 gallons and 200,000 gallons. We're 10% over the 50,000 gallon consumption rate, and we are 17% over the peer group on the 200,000 gallon consumption rate. On the sewer side, commercial again, 50,000 and 200,000. We're 2% over on the 50,000, so we're right there, and we're 18% under on the 200,000 sewer capacity. The water and wastewater fund expenditures, these are budgeted amounts on the expenditure side. Billing, and these are kind of even as you go down the rows. Billing and collection, source of supply, the purification plant at 1.8, the water distribution system at 1.4, wastewater treatment at 1.5, debt service, interest and fees at about $2 million for a total of about 11.3. Certificates of obligation for the water and sewer fund. And this goes to show you what going into debt can accomplish. We do so on the water side, like we said. We don't right now on the general fund side. But imagine if we hadn't gone into debt for some of these projects, where we would be with water and sewer in Sweetwater. We wouldn't have a new elevated storage tank. We'd be using one that's 95 years old. It's paid off, that's great, but we'd be using one that's 95 years old, and that's not such a good thing when that's the one water tower that we have in the city. We wouldn't have the well field development. We wouldn't have the new water treatment facility, relatively new, right, Eddie? About 20 years old or so, but to us it's new, and it's in good shape too. Elevated storage tank and system improvements, we wouldn't have that without debt. Water system improvements, wastewater plant improvements, we wouldn't have that without the debt. So I hope to present in the next several years a slide like this on the general fund side, showing the type of projects that we're able to do by issuing debt on the general fund side, the date of issuance, the maturity, the amount of issue. For the water wastewater side is about $20 million. Imagine if we didn't have that $20 million in debt to devote to these projects, where we would be on the water and sewer side. It's the same on the general fund side. We don't have any debt incurred on that side, and we really need to. So I'd like to be able to throw up a slide in the next several years saying these are the general fund projects that we had been able to do, and we wouldn't be able to do without issuing that debt. So the bond principal payable for all of these water and wastewater projects is about $13.1 million. Other items of interest on EMS, there's a lot of red there. It should come as no surprise. We're going to do everything we can to try to keep that from happening as we go off into the future. But the operating loss, fiscal year 22 budgeted, is about $1.2 million, and a fund balance of negative 2.5, 2.6 is where we are at on the EMS side. On the employee benefit fund, we're doing pretty well there. We've got total revenues of about 2.5, total expenses of about $2 million. Our net revenue is $434,000, and our fund balance has grown over the years. You'll see it's at the highest point it's been since at least 2017, at about $560,000. Hotel motel tax, it's been pretty steady at about $500,000, $600,000. You've got some peaks there of about $700,000 in fiscal year 15 and 16. Last year, fiscal year 2021, at about $565,000. we hope in 22 and beyond it'll continue to grow. I know Karen has a great interest in that, don't you, Karen? We all do. We all do. So a little bit about the budget calendar. Here we are on June 14th, the budget workshop. On July 25th, like I said previously, the chief appraiser certifies the tax rolls and calculates the effective and the rollback rates that we have to work with. On August 7th, we got the notice of the public hearing on the budget in the newspaper and notice of property tax rates and dates of those 2 public hearings. On August 9th, we get the proposed budget to the council. We'll present that to y'all at that time. And we do set the public hearings on August 9th for hearings on September 13th. And then on September 13th, of course, we have the public hearings on the proposed budget and the tax rate. And then we read and adopt the appropriation ordinance, the rate schedule, the budget ordinance, the ordinance to amend the fiscal year, current year 22 budget. On September 20th, we read and adopt the ordinance setting and the rate levying the tax rate. And then, of course, October 1st is the first day of fiscal year 2023. Any questions for myself or the staff? If not, thank you all very much.
Thanks, sir. Okay, we'll have a presentation from Mr. Andrew Friedman.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor and council members. Andrew Friedman with Samco Capital Markets. Been working with David and Patty and Dana on reviewing your capital improvement plan, some of which was covered, or all of which was really covered by Mr. Vella's presentation earlier. And so my task is kind of synthesizing that down and how do you tackle these capital improvements? What are your options? As Mr. Vella alluded to, the city does not have ad valorem supported debt. We've issued plenty of certificates of obligations over the last many years for water and sewer projects, and they're paid for from the revenues of the water and sewer system. But we have not done so for things like streets or other projects that may be supported by generally your ad valorem taxes of the city. That would include beyond streets things like park improvements, things like an aquatic center or a municipal swimming pool that don't otherwise have their own revenue stream and funding source. So handed out a couple of things to get started, and we'll talk about the legal size piece of paper here. This is what I call a tax rate impact analysis. So this is something that we haven't done again here in Sweetwater because we haven't issued debt supported by an interest and sinking portion of your tax rate. So again, cities have 2 different parts of your tax rate. The maintenance and operations portion, which is what you currently levy to fund the maintenance and operations of the city, paying police, fire, administrative, and generating the revenues to otherwise support the city. The other side of that is the interest and sinking tax rate. It's levied separately from the M&O rate. Those revenues generated from an interest and sinking tax rate can only be used to pay for debt service. So you can only levy an interest and sinking tax when you have debt outstanding. And so that's, from a timing perspective, this is a very busy time of year for cities that are adopting their budget, working on their tax rate. And as part of that, you have to have sold any debt to include that for the assessor collector to generate that tax rate for the coming year. And so a lot of cities are in the process right now of issuing debt for projects for their fiscal 2023 budget that they intend to take on during that time. Not the intention here to be pushing for you to borrow money for this upcoming budget, but really just to highlight that this is really the time of year when you go out and fund those capital improvements that would have been outlined and approved as part of the budget process and as part of that conversation. If you'll recall, this isn't the first time we've talked about streets. We had an election for street improvements that we took to the voters in 2020. It was 21, that were turned down. Well, the legislators in Austin passed a law 2 cycles ago that said you can issue COs for streets and you can issue GO bonds for streets, but if you fail a bond election for streets in our case, you cannot turn around and issue COs for a period of 3 years. You can only fund those projects with debt to be supported by ad valorem taxes if you get them approved by the voters, or you allow 3 years to pass, and then you could go and issue COs for them potentially. So the tax rate impact analysis that I put together assumes that you all want to go back to the voters to approve a combination of streets, parks, aquatic center projects that we might fund in 2024, for instance. This is really just a starting place. I wanted to get some information on paper to really highlight the process, what the potential tax rate would be, the increase, as Mr. Vella alluded to. We've got roughly 55 cents in M&O debt. If you sell bonds to fund street improvements or the plethora of projects you might consider, we're going to have to levy an INS tax. So the first kind of box here on the left side of the page starts off with what is your TAV, taxable assessed value. So y'all are showing actually a much higher number than I am, and the numbers fluctuate in terms of taxable assessed value between now and July 25th. But we're looking at $512 million in taxable assessed value for this upcoming budget year. We then would look at, okay, well, what are your annual debt service payments, and what's the resulting INS tax rate that you would need to levy in order to repay that debt? We set the tax rate just sufficient to pay the annual debt service for the coming year. So you can see we're talking about an issuance of $11,505,000 in general obligation bonds. In fiscal year 2024, you'd be repaying that starting in fiscal year 2025. And so roughly $925,000 in annual debt service against, again, a presumed property value of $543 million. We'd have to levy a tax rate of just over 17 cents in addition to our M&O rate in order to support those street projects. And so I can already tell you that our taxable assessed values are too low here. So the tax rate for that $11,505,000 is a little bit higher than it should be, maybe as much as a whole penny if our preliminary values are as high as $578 million. But just really highlights the math and the logic of how you calculate that interest and sinking tax rate, just as you do your M&O rate. And then as we grow and our debt service stays the same, the number of pennies you have to levy to repay that fixed annual payment, because the bonds would be at a fixed interest rate just as all of our other debt is, you have to levy less INS tax rate in order to repay that GO bond over time. And so for here, we've really just assumed we've got 3% growth for a period of 5 years annually, and then we assume we're not going to grow anymore. The reason that we try to be overly conservative is sometimes you have boom years, sometimes you have recession years that we may be entering, who knows, here in the near term. But what it does is it allows us to really under-promise and over-deliver to the voters. When you go out and you set a tax rate, we don't want to say we're going to set a 15-cent tax rate and then, well, we were planning on getting 8% growth every year in perpetuity, and when that doesn't materialize, all of a sudden a few years down the line they get a tax bill that says, well, instead of 15 or 16 cents, why is it 18 cents? Well, growth didn't materialize in the way that we had hoped. So we try to, in this instance, underestimate what we think the reality is. Certainly we expect to continue to grow. You all don't grow maybe as fast as cities in the Dallas Metroplex have been growing at 25 to 35% as recently as this year, but you average just under 3% growth every year for the last 10 years. So it's conservative to say we're not going to grow, and what that does is it puts us in a position to lower that tax rate that we initially set over time, or take advantage of that drop in the INS tax rate over time to layer in new debt for new projects 1, 2, 5, 10 years down the line. The $11,505,000 number is pulled from at least the latest version of the capital improvement plan, and it includes street improvements, it includes aquatic center improvements, and it includes park improvements. This is just putting numbers on paper. Direction from you all as a governing body determines how much you would want to borrow, when you would want to borrow it. Just wanted to get something on paper. This is an iterative process. It gets refined over and over again, because you may look at this and say, that's too high of a tax rate if you combine that with the M&O rate. You know, we want to be at blank amount, 75 cents and no more. We can start to really tailor what those projects are going to look like, or prioritize them, how you might be able to set up a financing structure over multiple years to try to achieve, one, the projects getting funded, and maintain the tax rate that you all are setting as a priority. And so that's really just kind of that starting point. In addition to this, it was my understanding that the capital improvement plan is based upon numbers from before 2021, certainly before all of the inflation that we've been seeing for at least the last year. So I increased all of these numbers by 30%. That may be correct, it may not be. We're seeing projects that are coming in well over 30% in some cases, over budget from what was funded just a year ago. So again, trying to be conservative. I'm not a supply chain expert, but certainly inflation is something that we're broadly seeing. So I wanted to take that into the account to the extent possible. The other aspect of this, and it's reflected on this tax rate impact analysis, you'll see to the right of what we just looked at, an additional financing 2 years later for $16 million and change. Your capital improvement plan goes out to fiscal year 2027. And so the projects in total equal, with that 30% adjustment, roughly around $28 million. And so we would layer in, and this is just, you know, for your review and some input from you all, well, what would that look like and how would we go about financing $28 million over the next 5 years? So you'd sell a portion of it in the next, year or 2 years, get voter approval or otherwise. Then you come back a couple years later, potentially could sell more. You could break it into more than 2 bond issues. You could issue, over the course of 10 years if you wanted to. It's really becomes a matter for you all in looking at and prioritizing the projects themselves. This is just kind of a starting point again. And you can see for that full $28 million, it's a 40-cent INS tax rate. That's a big number. You're getting up to Breckenridge type numbers, pushing $1. I work with a lot of cities all over the state. I would say that an average total tax rate that you see is between 72 and 76 cents for M&O and INS. Every city's different depending upon their commercial and residential makeup, how much sales tax they get compared to other cities that may be more of a bedroom community with less retail, less sales tax that's helping to supplement their budget. And so it's hard to make a direct apples to apples comparison, but certainly I would say getting to an INS rate that's 40 cents while you're already levying 55 cents on the M&O is getting into unsustainable territory. Not something that I'm certainly not recommending at this time, but you all are the ones that are examining the projects and hearing from the citizens about what your needs are. And you've got limited ability, revenue streams or otherwise, to go and finance these types of projects. Cities are, and you all know this, are simply not set up to pay-go fund capital projects for the most part. It's difficult to set up a piggy bank to create $28 million or even in the millions of dollars that you can go spend on capital projects, and that's why cities tend to borrow money to fund these larger capital improvements over time. So that covers the general fund. I'm happy to answer any questions that you all have. Mr. Vella, if I've left anything out that you want me to cover, certainly happy to do so. Okay. The smaller piece of paper that I passed out, moving over to the utility side, water and sewer. And this is something that we've done many, many times because we've borrowed money as recently as last year from the Water Development Board, which I'm pleased to see y'all are bidding out and spending those dollars. That same capital improvement plan outlines $5 to $6 million in additional water and sewer capital improvements that are needed over the next 5 years or so. And so we started to map out future borrowings for those improvements. And so the first, and you can see we look at the revenues that you're bringing in. This is based on your fiscal 2021 audit against those expenditures of the system. And that generates what we call an available for debt service number. How much money do you have after paying your operational expenses to cover debt service? So in fiscal 2021, based on those numbers, about $3.8 million. Now you've got transfers out because y'all support, I think, EMS and some other functions of the city with your utility system revenues. So that number may be closer to $3 million. And then we've actually got presently $2,070,000 in debt service coming due in your next budget year. So that leaves a little over $1 million, roughly to $1 million to $1.8 million for new debt service. Well, to tackle the projects that are in your upcoming budget for the utility system, that's roughly $2.6 million. That's going to be $200,000 in annual debt service over the course of 20 years to fund, just as we have all of the other COs the city has issued over the last many years. So you've got plenty of wherewithal there. Now, Ms. Torres and the finance staff and the city staff will go through and make sure to work that $200,000 annual payment into your budget and make sure that with all the other things that I might not be aware of in terms of transferring money and what the true upcoming budgetary needs of the system are, that fits within that. But from this perspective, y'all have got plenty of capacity to tackle these upcoming projects over the next 5 years. Whether or not a rate increase in your utility rates is necessary, she'll be able to apply that, and we can certainly work through as this project and financing plan comes together. But things otherwise look good from that perspective over the next 5 years based upon what we're seeing. We've, as often as we could when it comes to utility system improvements, rather than issue certificates of obligation in the public market where we go and hire an investment bank to go and underwrite a bond issue, we've applied to the Texas Water Development Board to fund our projects through them, where they act as the bond purchaser, and rather than paying the market rate, interest rate on debt, we get a subsidized interest rate from them. That subsidy is roughly 40% off of what we would otherwise go borrow money for in the public market. So it's a great economic benefit to us when we can go to them. Now, for the last couple of years, the Water Board hasn't been as attractive an option to go through because, one, interest rates were so absurdly low generally in the market, and two, the Water Board ran out of money to lend. And so it's been harder to qualify projects. They haven't had the money to lend. The Federal Infrastructure Act that was passed by the United States Congress is going to put several $1 billion back in their coffers. I'm not exactly clear, and Sage may actually know because he deals in the Water Board, maybe even, I'm sure more often than even I do, and I do a lot of work with the Water Board. We're not sure exactly when that funding is coming, but it's imminent from the last conversations I had with the finance folks at the Texas Water Development Board. So I leave that there as depending upon how quickly you all need to proceed with these projects, make an application to the Water Board. It'll take roughly a year from start to finish before we start to see those funds and actually issue the debt. Or if we need to move more expeditiously than that because the projects need to be tackled sooner rather than later, we can always go fund them under our own credit rating and do a certificate of obligation public offering. And we've done that in the past as well. It comes down to really timing and preference. Certainly on smaller dollar amounts, the benefit of the Water Board can sometimes not make as much sense because it does take extra engineering, extra environmental studies. There's a lot of stuff that gets baked into having to work with a bureaucratic institution like the Water Board, where the interest savings might not justify the additional cost to the city to have to work through them, along with the time delays. Certainly, every month things are getting more expensive, so having to take 9 or 10 months to go fund a project through the Water Board may mean a project could cost 10-20% more than if we could go move quicker under our own weight, perhaps paying a little higher interest. There may be a benefit to that. So I just bring that up because we have had great success working with the Water Board. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it. It's certainly an avenue to continue to look at as we consider these projects. So then the third item to review with you all, there's a lot of, Mr. Vela covered it in his budget presentation, in the capital improvement plan. There's a number of smaller assets that are in the budget for consideration that are paid for from an internal services fund for which the city's accumulated $1.4 million or so. and the need of within that fund is about that size or perhaps a little greater. And so Ms. Torres asked me to look at what our options would be. The city could always spend all of that fund balance back down and just purchase assets outright, no debt. And so that certainly is an option. One of the things that we wanted to look at also was, what if we borrow some amount of, borrow some amount of money for that, maybe spend half of that fund balance or some amount to purchase things outright, and then finance the other half for these various assets. And they're a brush truck, I think, and there's a number of different things in there. And then we look at the useful life of any of those assets. We always want to match the useful life of an asset with the term of its financing. So you'll see on that first page a 5-year financing and a 10-year financing. And for this, we assume we just borrowed the full amount of what was requested in at least the version of the CIP that we had seen at just under $1.5 million. And you can see that roughly the debt service payments over the course of the first 5 years are $215,000 a year. So of that $1.5 million bucket of money or $1.4 million bucket of money in the internal services fund, rather than spending that, we're spending $200,000 out of that each year, financing some of those vehicles again. And then as it rolls off and that payment drops to $86,000, you can keep that rolling program going so that you're replacing fleet vehicles or whatever those assets might be in a rolling type program. Again, completely your decision. It'd be done through a certificate of obligation, or if we shorten it to a tax note, it'd be 7 years amortization to help keep that going without depleting that fund outright and getting some of these things financed in your upcoming budget. And that could be done in concert with, as part of, for instance, the utility system. If we were looking at borrowing $2.6 million sometime this year, we could include these these shorter term assets in that financing. Instead of $2.6 million for the utility system, it might be, $3 million, $3.2 million, and we'd have internally separated out a 20-year portion for utility system, and then you'd have other parts of that where we're amortizing the debt over shorter amounts of time so that we're not financing, a 5-year useful life asset over 20. And so we can do that. What that achieves is economies of scale. We're borrowing one time to fund 3 different projects, as it were. So again, food for thought for you all. And again, I'm happy to answer any questions or cover anything that I've left out in error.
We should videotape, well, I guess we are videotaping it, and just make this available to the general public. You've done a great job just explaining how all this works. And I think it's up to us to just show the value as to why we're doing this. If you can say, hey, this is what this is going to do, and here's what's going to cost, and especially the reasoning is using why would you do a 20-year bond on a 5-year life project? People need to know that.
Certainly.
Because I don't think any of us really understand that on a regular basis or think about it like that. So.
And there's legal prohibitions when we sell debt that we have to prove to the Attorney General of the state of Texas that ensures that you're meeting that criteria.
And I don't think we have an opposition to debt. I think people just want to see the value. They just want to know why.
No, certainly. I think there's plenty of instances where it doesn't make sense to go borrow money for X, Y, or Z project. One of the things, and this isn't particular to any one project, but one of the things to also be very mindful of, we sell our debt almost always as tax exempt. That's how we get, as municipalities, we get the lowest interest rate possible. Well, with that comes some handcuffs from the federal government, the IRS. And what they want to see is that when we borrow money, we spend at least 85% of that money within 3 years of getting it. And so that's one other consideration here when we're looking at these capital improvements, especially over many years, is we only want to finance projects that we can reasonably construct and spend the money in 3 years. So we've had instances with all the growth that we've seen and with interest rates being low, with cities saying we want to borrow as much money as we can. We want to borrow $50 million to do all of our streets because rates will never be this low again. Can you actually construct $50 million of streets within 3 years? And their city engineer says, oh gosh, there's no way we could do that. And so, okay, you don't borrow money just because it's cheap. We've got to have a project and one we can construct reasonably and certainly without interrupting maybe all of the traffic in town. And so there's other considerations there that we'll continue to work with staff to make sure that there's multiple facets that have to come together to bring a cohesive plan into place.
How about timing, Andrew? What are we looking at as far as decisions being made and when those decisions need to be made?
Well, I would suggest, since we're not talking about, at least to my knowledge, issuing any debt that would be supported by the property tax in this coming year, we don't have any timing constraints right now. So the timing would be for, if we're talking about utility projects or capital, the vehicles and different things that we might want to sell, you could approve those in your budget. We know where that funding source is. You already have that. It's not taxes. It's from your internal services fund. We can pull that plan together as you all make decisions, perhaps through this budget process, and then start a notice of intention for the issuance of COs. And for the 2 new council members, when you borrow certificates of obligation, it's not as simple as just one council item and it's approved and it's sold. You adopt a notice of intention resolution which outlines the city's intent to borrow blank amount of money for X, Y, and Z projects. That notice, and that you expect to sell the debt on blank date. That notice then goes on the city's website and it gets posted in the city's paper of record for 2 consecutive weeks, and it's posted consecutively on the website. So 46 days after that first publication, the city's then in a position to lock in interest rates, sell, and for the council to take action adopting an ordinance selling those COs. So there's a roughly 90-day window to answer your question more directly of when you all say, yes, we want to proceed, to when you get the money. It's roughly 90 days. When we get into the streets projects and a potential bond election, you can call a bond election at the 2 uniform election dates, either May or November. And then there's a narrow window. It's roughly 2 weeks for you all to adopt an ordinance calling for that election. So it's the first 2 weeks in August. It's no sooner than 90 days of the election, no later than 78 days prior to the election for either May or November of each year. So you would call that election for November in August. You would call that election for May in February generally. And as you all work out a plan, I'm certainly happy to get with bond counsel and draft a timetable that highlights the many steps to calling that bond election and start to get that on paper. And then the one thing I was going to point out, and this y'all might just jot this down on that tax rate impact analysis. It's roughly 1.5 cents of INS rate per $1 million that you might borrow. So it's very easy math for you all because you don't have any debt outstanding to say, okay, we want to only do $5 million worth of streets. 1.5 times 5 is your INS rate for the coming year.
And we wouldn't necessarily have to go back to the voters to ask. We can issue certificates.
If you wait 3 years from that failed election date.
For streets, but how about for other type of
projects? Everything else is on the table. I guess I should also point out the last legislative session, they passed House Bill 1869, and that was legislature that further constricted cities and counties' ability to issue certificates of obligations for not just any project. Where the law finally settled was in order to issue a CO to be repaid from INS taxes, it cannot be a new city hall and it cannot be a new library. And so those are the 2 things you really can't fund with COs any longer. We're still able to issue COs for water and sewer projects, anything that we call self-supporting, where we can designate a revenue stream and say this is how we're going to repay it. You can issue COs for that. So there's just 2 really things that you can't do a CO for at this point. So aquatic center, pool, no issue. Park improvements, no issue. We'll see what the legislature does when they convene next year. But those are the rules as they stand today. You're very welcome.
We got a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Forgot to give it the most important person.
It's a marathon.
Yeah, that's the tax rate. Oh, okay. That's CIP plus 30 years. Right in I combined years. In my Excel file, actually, I did a more thorough job of kind of breaking it down, so I could have been explicit. But I think I took 24 and 25 as one issue.